What happens when you trade everything you've built for a stranger's smile on a screen? When the perfect romance turns into the perfect trap. This is the story of a man who abandoned a 15-year marriage, drained his bank accounts, and flew 8,000 miles for love. 3 weeks after saying, "I do," he'd discover evidence that would shatter everything he believed about the woman lying next to him. Before we get into this absolute mess of a story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because if you think you've heard it all, trust me, you haven't. And honestly, if you subscribe, may good fortune follow you. Consider it karma insurance for listening to someone else's catastrophic life choices. Meet Dalton Blackwood, 42 years old, real estate developer, living large in Phoenix, Arizona. The man built luxury estates for wealthy clients, drove a Range Rover, belonged to the right country club. On paper, Dalton had everything. Money? Check. Status? Absolutely. Beautiful wife. Her name was Patricia. 2 teenage daughters? 15-year-old Alexis and 13-year-old Madison. But here's the thing about perfect lives. They're usually hiding something ugly underneath, like a mansion with a cracked foundation. Dalton and Patricia's marriage had lasted a decade and a half, but somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being partners and started being roommates who shared a mortgage. Patricia threw herself into charity work, organizing galas, volunteering at the Children's Hospital. Noble stuff. Meanwhile, Dalton was closing deals, schmoozing clients, and coming home to a house that felt more like a hotel lobby than a home. The warmth was gone. The connection, forgotten. They were two people living parallel lives that never quite intersected anymore. So what does a man do when he feels invisible in his own life? When success feels empty and the person sleeping next to him might as well be a stranger? Well, some men buy a sports car. Others take up golf. Dalton Blackwood? He decided to go shopping for love online. And not just any online dating. Oh no, he went international. Stay with me. This gets so much worse. Late nights at the office became Dalton's norm. Patricia was busy with her fundraisers. The girls were absorbed in their teenage worlds. And Dalton? He was scrolling. One particularly lonely Tuesday evening, Dalton stumbled onto a Filipino dating website. You know the type. Promises of companionship, beautiful photos, women looking for genuine connection. Or so they claim. Dalton told himself it was just curiosity. Just browsing. Just seeing what was out there. He created a profile, and here's where the first lie began. He listed himself as recently divorced. Not separated. Not unhappily married. Divorced. Why? Because apparently, being a cheater sounds worse than being freshly single. The mental gymnastics some people do to justify their choices would win Olympic gold. Within hours, his inbox exploded. Dozens of women, all eager to chat. But one profile caught his attention differently than the rest. Her name, she said, was Soledad Reyes, 28 years old, living in Manila, working in hotel management. Never married, no children. The photos showed a stunning woman with long dark hair, radiant smile, and eyes that seemed to see right through the screen. But it wasn't just her looks. It was her words. Soledad asked questions that Patricia hadn't asked in years. What makes you happy? What do you dream about when you're alone? Who is the real Dalton, beneath the business suits? And Dalton? He ate it up like a starving man at a feast. Their conversations became daily, then twice daily, then constant. Video calls that stretched until 2 in the morning. Soledad laughed at his jokes, listened to his frustrations, made him feel seen in a way he'd forgotten was possible. She told him about her life in Manila, her job at a 5-star hotel, her love for her family, her dreams of finding someone to build a life with. She seemed independent, accomplished, genuine. Red flags? Dalton wasn't looking for red flags. He was looking for validation, and Soledad was giving it to him by the truckload. 6 months into their digital romance, things were getting serious. They talked about the future, about what life could look like together, about forever. And then came the requests. They started small, subtle. My grandmother is sick, Soledad mentioned one evening. her voice cracking with emotion. The hospital bills are more than I expected. Dalton sent $500 without hesitation. 2 weeks later, I lost my job at the hotel. Corporate restructuring. I'm devastated. Another $1,000 wired immediately. A month after that, my apartment lease is up and I can't afford the deposit for the new place. $2,000 this time. Each time, Soledad was grateful, embarrassed. She never asked directly, just mentioned the problem and Dalton would swoop in like a knight in shining armor. He didn't see the pattern. Or maybe he didn't want to, because acknowledging the pattern meant acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the fairy tale romance he desperately needed it to be. What do you think was happening here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Dalton being scammed? Or was this real love hitting a rough patch? Let me know your theories. Back in Phoenix, Patricia wasn't stupid. Marriage might have been cold, but she still noticed things. The late-night phone calls Dalton took in his car. The way he smiled at his screen when he thought no one was watching. The distance that had grown from neglect now felt like a canyon. One afternoon, while Dalton was at a site inspection, Patricia did what any suspicious spouse would do. She checked the phone records, call after call, text after text, all going to the same international number, the Philippines. Patricia didn't confront him immediately. She sat with the information, letting it settle, letting the betrayal sink into her bones. When she finally did confront him, she was surprisingly calm. The kind of calm that's actually terrifying. Who is she? 3 words. That's all it took. Dalton tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to make Patricia understand that he felt alone, that their marriage had been dead for years, that he'd found something real. Patricia's response? Get out. The girls found out within days. Alexis and Madison, who'd worshipped their father, who'd thought he hung the moon, learned that Daddy had a girlfriend in the Philippines, that he'd been lying, that he'd been planning to leave them. They stopped answering his calls, stopped responding to his texts. The silence from his daughters hurt worse than anything Patricia could have said. But Dalton? He didn't stop. He didn't reconsider. He didn't think, maybe I should fix this. No, he doubled down. He filed for divorce. Papers were drawn up, signed, finalized with a speed that would impress a Formula One pit crew. The joint savings account, the one he and Patricia had built over 15 years, was emptied. $180,000, gone in a single transaction. Dalton quit his business partnerships, sold his share of the company at a loss because he was in a hurry, booked a one-way ticket to Manila. Patricia got the house, the girls, half of everything else. And Dalton? He got a plane ticket and a dream. Think about that for a second. 15 years of marriage, 2 daughters, a successful business, all traded for a woman he'd never actually met in person. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and you want to scream at the screen, "Don't go in there." That's this. Except Dalton wasn't watching a movie. He was starring in one. And he was about to walk right through the door everyone else could see was a terrible idea. Dalton landed at Ninoy Aquino International Airport on a humid Thursday morning, his heart racing with anticipation. Soledad was waiting for him at arrivals, even more beautiful in person than on video. They embraced like lovers in a romance novel. Finally together. Finally real. The wedding was planned for 2 weeks later. Small, intimate ceremony at a local church in Quezon City. Just close family, a handful of friends. Dalton didn't mind. He told himself it was romantic, private, special. Soledad's family was there. Her parents, several aunts and uncles, cousins. They smiled, shook Dalton's hand, welcomed him. But something felt off. They were polite but distant, warm but guarded. Dalton chalked it up to cultural differences. Maybe Filipino families were just more reserved with outsiders. He didn't push. The ceremony itself was lovely. Simple vows, traditional touches, a reception at a modest restaurant. Dalton was blissfully happy. He'd left everything behind, but he'd found something real, something true, something worth it, or so he thought. The marriage certificate was processed remarkably fast, like suspiciously fast. In most countries, there's paperwork, waiting periods, bureaucracy. But Soledad seemed to know people, had connections. The official documents were ready within days. Dalton, who'd never dealt with international marriage logistics before, figured this was just how things worked in the Philippines. Efficient. Simple. He had no idea he should have been asking more questions. They moved into a modest apartment in Makati. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. Soledad said she was looking for work, applying to hotels, waiting to hear back. Dalton supported them both with what remained of his savings. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, very slowly, the cracks started to show. Living with someone is different than video chatting with them. You learn their habits, their routines, the things they try to hide. Dalton started noticing things. First, Soledad never actually went to job interviews. She'd mention applications, say she had a phone screening, but there were never any in-person meetings. No professional clothes laid out. No nervous energy before an interview. Nothing. When Dalton offered to help, to use his business connections, to reach out to hotel managers he might know, Soledad would change the subject. "I've got it handled, honey. Don't worry." Then there were the phone calls. Always late at night. Always taken in the bedroom with the door closed. Soledad would emerge 20 minutes later. Her demeanor shifted, her smile forced. "Who was that?" Dalton would ask. "Just my cousin. Family stuff." But the calls came too frequently, and Soledad's tone during them, the bits Dalton could hear through the door, didn't sound like casual family chat. They sounded urgent, transactional. One afternoon, Dalton decided to introduce Soledad to an expat couple he'd met at a local cafe. American, friendly, eager to welcome another foreigner to Manila. Soledad made excuses. She wasn't feeling well. She had a headache. Maybe next time. Next time came. Same excuses. Dalton began to realize that Soledad actively avoided meeting new people. Their social circle consisted of exactly 0 people. Just the two of them isolated in their apartment. And then came the neighbor incident. Dalton was taking out the trash one evening when their downstairs neighbor, an older Filipina woman, stopped him. "You married Rosario, yes? She's a good woman. We've known her for many years." Dalton smiled politely, confused. "I think you mean Soledad." The woman's face scrunched in confusion. "Soledad? No. Rosario. We've been neighbors for 10 years. She walked away, leaving Dalton standing there with a garbage bag in one hand and a sinking feeling in his chest. That night, while Soledad was showering, Dalton did something he'd never done before. He opened her laptop. She'd left Facebook logged in. And what Dalton found there made his blood run cold. The profile name was Rosario Santos. The photos went back 20 years. And in those photos was Soledad, but not the Soledad he knew. This was a woman with a history, a long history, photos with children, birthday parties, school events, for different kids ranging from early 20s down to maybe 13, photos with men, white men, foreign men, different men over different years, wedding photos, anniversary photos, photos that looked exactly like the life Dalton thought he was building with her. And then he found the birth certificate, digitally scanned, stored in a folder labeled Important Documents. Birth date, March 15, 1980. Dalton did the math. That made her 45 years old, not 28. He sat there, staring at the screen, his hands shaking. Everything he thought he knew crumbled in an instant. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd given up everything for, didn't exist. Soledad was a character, a role, a carefully constructed fantasy. And Dalton had been the latest fool to believe it. Dalton didn't sleep that night. He printed everything. The photos, the birth certificate, evidence of previous marriages, tags on Facebook from years ago with different foreign men, different last names attached to Rosario's profile. By morning, he had a folder thick with proof. When Soledad or Rosario or whoever she really was emerged from the bedroom, Dalton was waiting at the kitchen table. The folder sat in front of him. "We need to talk." She knew immediately. The color drained from her face. She looked at the folder, then at Dalton, then back at the folder. Sit down, he said. His voice was eerily calm. She sat. Dalton opened the folder and began laying out the evidence. Photo by photo. Document by document. The lies exposed in black and white. Who are you? He asked. Because you're not Soledad Reyes, 28 years old, hotel manager. That woman doesn't exist. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, the tears started. Real tears this time, not the manufactured ones she'd used for money. I'm Rosario, she whispered. Rosario Santos. I'm 45. And the children? Mine. From different relationships. 4 of them. They live with my mother. And the other men? The other foreigners. She closed her eyes. I've done this before. 3 times before you. Dalton felt like he'd been punched. This is what you do? You marry foreign men for money? I was trying to survive. Her voice cracked. Do you know how hard it is to raise 4 children alone in this country? My family depends on me. The money you sent, the money from the others, it kept us alive. Put my kids in school. It put food on the table. So you built an entire fake identity? Lied about your age? Your name? Your whole life? Yes. The honesty at least was refreshing. But it didn't make Dalton feel any better. The hotel job was fake. The whole innocent, never-been-married thing was fake. Everything was a lie. Not everything, Rosario said quietly. Some of what I felt was real. You're not a bad man, Dalton. You were kind to me. But yes, it started as a scheme. It always starts as a scheme. Dalton stood up, pacing the small kitchen. I left my family for you. My real family. My daughters won't speak to me. My wife, my ex-wife, she'll never forgive me. I destroyed everything for a fantasy. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back the life I had. I know. Dalton looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the woman he'd fallen in love with but a stranger. A desperate woman who'd turned deception into survival. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. I want an annulment, he said. This marriage isn't real. It was built on fraud. I want out. Rosario's eyes hardened. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You lied. About everything. That's fraud. And you think the courts will care? You think they'll side with the rich American who came here and married a Filipina? You're in my country now, Dalton. Things work differently here. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. You want to leave? Fine. But it's going to cost you. And there it was. Even in confession, even in the ruins of the lie, Rosario was still playing the game. Dalton realized he wasn't just trapped in a fake marriage. He was trapped in a foreign country with a woman who knew how to work the system far better than he did. The nightmare was just beginning. Dalton hired a lawyer, an expensive one, recommended by the American embassy. Together, they filed for an annulment based on fraud. The evidence was clear. False identity, misrepresentation, deception. Any reasonable judge would grant it. But Rosario fought back hard. She filed a counterclaim accusing Dalton of abuse. Verbal abuse. Emotional manipulation. She claimed he'd threatened her, controlled her, isolated her from her family. None of it was true. But in the Philippines, accusations like that carried weight. Especially when the accused was a foreigner and the accuser was a local woman with children to protect. The court system moved at a glacial pace. Hearings were delayed. Paperwork was lost. Dalton's lawyer explained that these things took time, but Dalton suspected something more. Rosario had connections. She'd been working this angle for years. She knew which palms to grease, which officials to befriend. Meanwhile, Dalton's money was running out. The savings he'd brought were depleting faster than he'd anticipated. Legal fees, living expenses, everything added up. He tried reaching out to his former business partners back in Phoenix, hoping to secure some consulting work, some way to generate income. But word of his failed marriage, his legal troubles, his damaged reputation had spread. Investors wanted nothing to do with him. Partners who'd once been friends suddenly had excuses for why they couldn't help. Dalton was alone, truly alone. He started drinking, not heavily at first, just a beer with dinner. then 2. Then a bottle of whiskey that lasted 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The apartment felt smaller. The walls pressed in. The tropical heat that had once seemed romantic now felt suffocating. Rosario, sensing his deterioration, became bolder. She demanded more money. "You owe me," she'd say. "You married me. You made promises. You need to support me and my children." "I don't owe you anything," Dalton would shoot back. "This whole thing was a con. Prove it in court." "Oh wait, you're trying. How's that going?" She was right. The legal system wasn't moving. And even if it did, Dalton was hemorrhaging money he didn't have. His daughters still wouldn't talk to him. Patricia had blocked his number. His old life felt like a distant memory, something that had happened to someone else. Some nights, Dalton would sit on the small balcony of the apartment, staring out at the Manila skyline, and wonder how he'd gotten here. How a successful businessman, a father, a man who'd built a life from nothing, had ended up broke and broken in a foreign country, married to a woman whose real name he'd only learned through detective work. Pride? Loneliness? Stupidity? All of the above? Whatever the answer, it didn't change the reality. He was stuck, trapped, and every day the trap got a little tighter. It happened on a Tuesday night, 3 months after Dalton had discovered the truth. 3 months of legal battles, mounting debts, and a marriage that was less a relationship and more a hostage situation. Rosario came home late. She'd been out, wouldn't say where. Dalton, several drinks deep, was waiting for her. "Where were you?" "Out." "Not your business. You're my wife. It's absolutely my business." Rosario laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Your wife? Please, we both know what this is. You bought yourself a fantasy and got mad when reality showed up. I didn't buy anything. You sold me a lie, and you were eager to believe it. You think you're a victim? You abandoned your real family for some photos and sweet words online. That's on you, Dalton. All on you." Something in Dalton snapped. Not violently, but internally. The last thread of patience, of hope, of dignity, just broke. "I want you out," he said quietly. "This apartment is paid for with my money. I want you gone. Make me." "I'm serious, Rosario." "So am I." She stepped closer, her eyes challenging. "You think you can just throw me out? This is my country, my home. You're the outsider here. You're the one who doesn't belong." The argument escalated. Voices raised. Accusations thrown like grenades. Dalton said things he'd regret. Rosario said things designed to hurt. And then she made a move toward the bedroom. Dalton stepped to block her path. She shoved him. He stumbled back toward the apartment's interior staircase, a quirky feature of the 2-level unit. He didn't push her. He swears he didn't. But in the chaos, in the anger, in the moment of pushing and shoving, Rosario lost her footing. She fell backward down the stairs. 6 steps. Not a huge fall, but enough. The sound of her head hitting the concrete bottom step was something Dalton would hear in his nightmares forever. He rushed down. She was unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head. Dalton's hands shook as he called for help, his broken Tagalog barely comprehensible to the emergency operator. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. Paramedics stabilized her, rushed her to the hospital. Dalton followed in a daze, his mind unable to process what had just happened. At the hospital, doctors worked for hours. The head injury was severe. Swelling. Trauma. They used words like critical and uncertain prognosis. Dalton sat in the waiting room, covered in Rosario's blood, and realized his life had just gone from terrible to catastrophic. Because here's the thing about accidents in foreign countries, especially accidents involving locals and foreigners, especially when there's already a legal dispute and accusations of abuse on record. They don't look like accidents. They look like crimes. Rosario survived. But the woman who woke up 3 days later wasn't the same person who'd fallen down those stairs. Permanent brain damage. The doctors explained it clinically. Frontal lobe injury. Cognitive impairment. Memory issues. She'd need full-time care for the rest of her life. And Dalton? He was arrested at the hospital. The charge was assault. The prosecution argued that Dalton, in a fit of rage, had pushed Rosario down the stairs. The history of their contentious relationship, the annulment proceedings, the accusations of abuse, it all painted a picture. Dalton's lawyer tried to argue accident, mutual altercation, self-defense even, but the evidence was circumstantial at best. No witnesses, just two people, one argument, and a devastating injury. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Rosario's family testified against him. Her children, now aware of what their mother had been doing, were torn but ultimately sided with family. They painted Dalton as an aggressive foreigner who'd used their mother and then tried to discard her. The media had a field day. American businessman abuses Filipino wife. The headlines wrote themselves. Public opinion solidified quickly. In the court of Filipino sentiment, Dalton was guilty before the verdict was ever read. His defense was weak. He'd been drinking. There was an argument. Things got physical, even if unintentionally. And the result was a woman with permanent brain damage. The judge, an older Filipino woman who'd seen too many cases of foreign men taking advantage of local women, showed no sympathy. Guilty. The sentence, 8 years in a Manila correctional facility. Dalton stood there, numb, as the words washed over him. 8 years. He was 43 years old. He'd be 51 when he got out. If he survived that long. The prison where they sent him was overcrowded, undersupplied, and brutal. Dalton, a soft American businessman, stood out like a beacon. He learned quickly to keep his head down, speak only when necessary, and never make eye contact with the wrong people. His days became a monotonous cycle. Wake up, eat whatever slop passed for food, work detail, exercise in a concrete yard, back to the cell, sleep, repeat. Letters to his daughters went unanswered. Patricia had moved on, remarried within 2 years to a man who coached Madison's soccer team. A stable man, present man. Dalton's business empire in Phoenix collapsed completely. His former partners divided his assets, settled his debts, and erased his name from the company letterhead. Everything he'd built, gone. Everything he'd sacrificed, wasted. And for what? A woman who never existed. A fantasy that cost him everything real. Let's talk about the real victims here. Because in this story, everyone lost. Dalton lost his freedom, his family, his life. But he walked into this with his eyes open. He made choices. Selfish, destructive choices. Patricia rebuilt her life, but the betrayal left scars. She trusted someone for 15 years and learned that trust meant nothing when weighed against loneliness and ego. She became guarded, careful, suspicious. Her new marriage was stable, but she never fully let her guard down again. Alexis and Madison grew up with therapy appointments and trust issues. They learned that people leave, that fathers aren't always heroes, that families can shatter overnight. Alexis struggled with relationships through her 20s, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Madison became fiercely independent, refusing to rely on anyone because reliance meant vulnerability. Rosario's children lost their mother in every way that mattered. She was alive but absent. Her brain damage left her childlike, dependent, unable to recognize them some days. The scheme that had supported them now left them as caregivers to a woman who couldn't care for herself. And Rosario, the woman who'd built a life on deception, she lost everything too. Her mind, her independence, her future. Whatever you think about her methods, no one deserves what happened to her. For children now in their 20s and teens, raising themselves while caring for a mother who needs round-the-clock supervision. The money Dalton and the others sent? Gone. Depleted by medical bills and basic survival. 2 families destroyed. Multiple lives permanently altered. And for what? Here's what this story really teaches us. It's easy to point fingers, to call Dalton an idiot, to call Rosario a predator. But the truth is more complicated than villains and victims. Dalton was lonely, middle-aged, and looking for validation in all the wrong places. He ignored red flags because acknowledging them meant acknowledging his own mistakes. Rosario was desperate, impoverished, and using the only resources she had to survive. Her methods were wrong, but desperation makes people do terrible things. Neither of them are innocent, but neither of them are purely evil either. The online romance industry thrives on stories like this. Lonely people seeking connection, desperate people seeking survival, and somewhere in the middle, tragedy waiting to happen. So what's the lesson? Don't trust anyone online? Don't seek connection? Don't take risks? No, the lesson is simpler than that. When something seems too perfect, it probably is. When you're making life-altering decisions, take a breath. Talk to people who love you. Listen to the doubts. Trust your instincts when they're screaming that something is wrong. And maybe, just maybe, work on the relationships you already have before burning them down for something new and shiny. Dalton Blackwood sits in a Manila prison today, 3 years into his 8-year sentence. He's learned Tagalog, found a routine, made peace with his choices in the way people do when they have no other option. He writes letters to his daughters every week. They still don't respond. Maybe one day they will. Maybe not. Rosario lives with her eldest daughter in a small house outside Manila. She has good days and bad days. On good days, she remembers her children's names. On bad days, she doesn't remember having children at all. 2 lives, 2 families, 1 catastrophic series of choices. So here's my question for you. Who's the villain in this story? The man who abandoned his family for a fantasy? The woman who built that fantasy to survive? Both? Neither? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think, because this story doesn't have easy answers. If the story made you think, hit that subscribe button. Click the bell, because the True Crime Vault has more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, desperation, and the lies we tell ourselves. And remember, if you subscribe, may good fortune find you. Consider it a blessing for making it through this whole mess of a story. Stay aware out there. The most dangerous lies aren't always the ones other people tell us. Sometimes they're the ones we tell ourselves. Trust your gut, protect your peace, and never, ever trade something real for something that only exists on a screen. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and maybe, just maybe, appreciate the people right in front of you before they become the ones you lost. This has been True Crime Vault. Thanks for watching.